Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Chris. Together we're the Gen X couple.
Hey guys.
Hello everyone. Take one.
Welcome back. Father's Day is coming up soon, and we thought that we would honor all the dads by talking about some classic dad sayings today. And I think that this is going to instantly put you guys back to your childhood, because the second that you hear some of these dad phrases, you can picture exactly where you were standing, exactly what you were asking for, and the tone that they were said in. And these weren't just random comments either. It's almost like these were scripted responses that every dad seemed to have ready at all times, no matter what the situation. And the wild part is, you don't even realize how often you've heard them until you're older, and suddenly they're stuck in your head. And it's like they quietly just took up residence up there.
And then one day, without any warning at all, you hear yourself say it. One out loud. It's honestly a little unsettling. It's not like you're building up to it or consciously deciding, I'm going to start using dad phrases now. Just slips out in a moment.
Slip out.
Stress or annoyance, and immediately you realize there's no going back. That's the moment you crossed over into full dad mode. Mm-hmm. And it's less of a transition and more of a jump scare.
Seriously. Because you spend your whole childhood rolling your eyes at these sayings, thinking that they're outdated or dramatic or completely unnecessary. And then you suddenly understand exactly why they exist, because they fit so perfectly into everyday life. They're efficient, they get the point across, and honestly, they kind of shut down arguments immediately, which, now that I think about it, might have been the whole point all along.
Oh, absolutely. These phrases are basically the original shortcuts for ending a conversation without actually having to argue your case. You don't need a long explanation when you got something short, memorable, and slightly intimidating, ready to go.
Intimidating!
It's like verbal muscle memory that kicks in at the exact right moment, and somehow every dad across generations landed on the exact same spot.
Mm-hmm. So you've all heard this phrase. Let's start with the most common one, which is money doesn't grow on trees. And yes, I've said it. I think you've said it, Christian.
A bunch of times.
We've all said it.
Maybe once a day.
He says it to me more than the kids, honestly.
Yes.
So, like I said, money doesn't grow on trees is probably one of the most iconic dad sayings of all time. And I feel like this one showed up anytime you asked for literally anything that cost even a small amount of money, whether it was a toy, snacks at the store, or something like frivolous. It didn't matter what it was. You could almost predict the response before it even came out of your dad's mouth. And once it was said, you knew the conversation was pretty much over.
Yeah, there was no follow-up discussion after that one. You didn't get a negotiation. You didn't get maybe later. You just got a hard stop. And as a kid, it always felt slightly suspicious because trees are everywhere. So part of you is thinking, are we absolutely sure about this? Like, has anyone really checked every tree?
Yeah, where is that elusive money tree?
Yes, it felt like less a fact and more like a rule that adults just agreed to enforce.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is actually that this phrase goes back hundreds of years to a time when most people were much more directly connected to how resources actually worked. If you were growing your own food or working the land, you understood very clearly that things didn't just appear. You had to put in time and effort to get anything of value. So saying money doesn't grow on trees was a very literal way of explaining scarcity. It was a simple metaphor that made it perfectly clear that money had limits, just like anything else.
And when you look at it that way, it actually makes a lot more sense when it's stuck around for so long. Mm-hmm. It's short, it's visual, and it's easy for a kid to understand, even if they don't like it.
And we didn't.
But as a kid, you're thinking about agriculture history or economic principles. You're just thinking, I really want that thing. and now I'm not getting it. So it kind of becomes this phrase you associate with disappointment more than anything else.
True.
It's like the soundtrack to be telling no.
Exactly. And I think that's why it sticks with people so strongly into adulthood. It's not just the phrase itself, it's the feeling attached to it, which, let's be real, is usually frustration mixed with a little bit of confusion. But then you get older and you start paying your own bills, and suddenly that phrase becomes back in a completely different way. You realize it wasn't dramatic at all. It's actually pretty accurate.
Yes. And once you're the one looking at your bank account and doing the mental math in the grocery store, that phrase hits very different. You start to understand that it wasn't just about the saying no, it's about setting expectations. And the irony is, now you catch yourself thinking it before you even say it out loud. It just kind of lives in your brain as a default response to anything expensive.
Well, that doesn't work in my brain, but usually Chris is here to say it out loud to me when that fails. But now we're going to move on to the next dad phrase, and that is, I'm not made of money. We've all heard it. And I'm not made of money was usually the follow-up when you didn't take the hint the first time when they told you money doesn't grow on trees. And this one always felt a little more personal. Like now it wasn't just about the trees anymore. It was about your dad specifically being pushed to his financial limit. And somehow it carried a little more weight because it sounded almost defensive, like you had accused him of being secretly rich. It definitely had tone to it.
Yes, this one always felt you had to cross the line without realizing it. Like you went from asking a simple question to suddenly become part of a larger financial crisis that you didn't even know existed. And as a kid, you don't fully understand money yet. So you're standing there thinking, I didn't think you were made of money. I just wanted a snack. It escalates very quickly.
Indeed. What's interesting about this phrase is that it really started showing up more in the early 20th century, especially as consumer culture started to grow. Suddenly there were more things to buy, more advertising, and more pressure on families to spend money that they might not necessarily have. So parents needed a quick way to push back against the constant requests. And this phrase did exactly that. It set a boundary in a very clear way.
And it's actually kind of clever when you think about it, because it turns money into something physical. It makes it sound like if they were made of money, then sure, maybe you could have whatever you want. But since they're not, the answer is no. It simplifies something complicated into something really easy to understand, even if at the time you didn't appreciate the explanation at all.
Right. And I think this is one of those phrases that hits completely differently once you're an adult, because now you understand not just the cost of things, but the accumulation of all the little expenses that add up over time. It's not just about one toy or one purchase, it's about everything all together. And suddenly the phrase doesn't feel as dramatic anymore. Again, this one is pretty accurate also.
Yes, it's like your brain automatically goes into budget mode, even for small things. And that's when you realize this phrase didn't just come from nowhere, it came from experience.
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to our next one, which is in a completely different category. And I don't know if my dad ever said it, but my mom said it all the time. Because now we're going to be moving away from money and into manners. And that phrase is, were you raised in a barn? It's one of those phrases that shows up the second you leave the door open.
Yes.
You forget to say thank you, or you do anything remotely chaotic in the house. It's less about the actual action and more about calling out the behavior in a very dramatic way. And it definitely sticks with you. Although I don't think I've ever said that. That one hasn't come out of my mouth.
My dad only said this one when we left the door open.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's another one. Or even like when we left the lights on, I think we got that one. Like, were you raised in a barn?
I know. So it gets a little confusing for a kid because barns didn't seem that bad. Like in your mind, you're picturing animals, open space. Maybe it's kind of fun. So part of you is thinking, is that really such a terrible thing? But clearly, based on the tone, the answer is yes.
I had that super cool Fisher-Price Little People barn, and that was super cool.
Yeah.
That made barn living look super fun. So yeah, that was totally confusing. I would have loved that, actually. They have horses and chickens and all kinds of cool animals. But this phrase actually goes back to a time when barns were associated with animals coming and going freely, doors being left open, and generally a lack of structure or any kind of order. So asking if someone was raised in a barn was basically a way of saying you're acting like you don't understand basic social rules. It wasn't meant literally, it was more of a comparison to a place where manners didn't apply. And over time, it just became shorthand for calling out rude behavior.
And it's such a vivid image, which is probably why it stuck around for so long. You immediately picture a wide open space with no rules. It makes the point without needing a long explanation. But as a kid, you're not thinking about the symbolism. You're just thinking, I forgot to close the door. This feels like an overreaction. And it always felt a little disproportionate to the crime.
I feel like I'm going to have to bust that open the next time the kids do something. Because I know I've never said it to them, but I think it needs to be brought into the house. These phrases, I think, what makes them so memorable is that they're slightly exaggerated and very specific. And that combination makes them stick in your brain in a way that a normal correction probably wouldn't. So you might forget, please close the door, but you never forget being asked if you were raised in a barn.
No, that stays with you forever. And the funny part is now you understand exactly what it was said because the same little things start to bother you. You notice doors being left open, lights being left on, all those tiny habits. Now the phrase makes a lot more sense than when you were a kid.
All right, so now we have to talk about this next one.
I think you said say this next one more to me than the kids.
Yeah, I've never said it to the kids, and that's very specific. I've specifically never used this with my kids, although it was used on me many times, but for you, you don't count. But anyway, so we're talking about because I said so. That's not really an excuse or a reason, and I've made it a point to never use that with my own kids, because it's such a baloney excuse. Because I said so, like that's not a good answer. Kids, this is the first time on earth. They need explanations. Because I said so isn't a good enough. You need a reason. You need to explain it to them. But anyway, my parents used that on me many, many times. And that was really the ultimate conversation ender. That was it, the final word. And there was no room for debate or follow-up questions after because I said so. It didn't matter how logical your argument was. You were not winning against this. It was the verbal equivalent of a locked door.
Yeah, this one felt like hitting a wall. You could have the best argument prepared. You could be making total sense. And then suddenly it's just over. There's no appeal process. There's no second opinion. It's done. And as a kid, that's incredibly frustrating because you feel like you deserve an explanation.
Exactly, which is exactly why I would never use this on my own kids. But what's interesting is that this phrase really comes from authority structures that go way back centuries where decisions weren't always explained. They were just simply enforced. Parents didn't necessarily have the time or energy to justify every rule, especially in busy households. So because I said you became a quick way to establish authority without getting into a long discussion. It wasn't about logic. It was about control and efficiency.
And when you look at it from that perspective, it actually makes a lot more sense because explaining everything takes time. And sometimes there just isn't time. But as a kid, you're not thinking about efficiency. You're thinking about fairness. You want to understand the reasoning when you don't get something or it feels like you're being shut down.
Yeah, and I think that's why this phrase has such a strong emotional reaction tied to it. It represents that moment where you realize you don't have the final say, no matter how good your argument is. But then as you get older, you start to see situations where a long explanation isn't practical. And suddenly the phrase does start to feel a little more understandable, although again, I never use it, except for Chris.
Yeah, I've never heard you say it to the kids, but I think I've heard you say it to me a full time.
Because you know exactly how I think. You know what my reasoning is.
It's like a full circle moment, though.
Yeah, it is, kind of. So this next one feels pretty seasonal because it usually showed up either in the dead of winter or the peak of summer. And I'm talking about we're not heating the whole neighborhood or we're not cooling the whole neighborhood, depending on the season. And it was always triggered by a door being left open, for those of you who lived in a barn, for more than 3 seconds. And it didn't matter if you were coming right back in. The reaction was immediate, like you were crossing some kind of an invisible line.
Yeah, there was no zero grace period with this one. The second the door opened, you could practically feel the tension in the air, like someone somewhere is just sensing the thermostat being challenged. And as a kid, you're thinking, it's open for 2 seconds. How much damage could this really do? But clearly, in that moment, it felt catastrophic.
I'm going to translate that one too, catastrophic. And this one really comes from the rise of modern heating and air conditioning, especially in the mid 20th century when energy costs became a bigger part of everyday life. Before that, people were used to adapting to the temperature, but once those systems were installed, suddenly there was something to protect. Leaving a door open wasn't just inconvenient, it was wasteful. And that's the idea that stuck.
And it's funny because now as an adult, you can't get it immediately. You feel that little shift in temperature and suddenly you're aware of how hard your system is working. It's like you developed this built-in sensitivity to it that has never happened before, but now as you get older, it's starting.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't even think twice about...
You get cold fast.
I do get cold fast, so it's like a welcome relief when I go outside and like I'll just open the door a little bit to let a little heat in to offset the air conditioning. But anyway, this is one of those phrases that highlights the shift from being a kid to being an adult. As a kid, it feels like an overreaction to something really small, and as an adult, it feels completely reasonable to something that generally affects your comfort and your bills. It's just a perspective shift, really.
Yeah, you're the one quietly closing doors behind people now. It's like you inherited this responsibility along with the phrase.
Yeah. All right, so this next one feels like a slightly more modern evolution of the earlier money phrases. And this one is, do I look like an ATM? Never said that phrase once in my entire life. And this one actually does have a little more attitude I just pulled a Chris. It definitely has a little more attitude to it, and it's definitely got a little more personality. It's not just saying no, it's calling out the request in a way that makes you rethink even asking, and it definitely leaves an impression.
Yeah, this one feels a little sharper. It's not just about money being limited, it's about the expectation behind the question. Like you're not just asking for something, you're apparently assuming unlimited access. And this is the correction. It adds a little bit of humor, but also a very clear boundary.
Yeah, and this phrase comes out of the rise of ATMs and easy access to cash, especially in the late 20th century. Before that, money felt a little less immediate, and you had to actually go to the bank, like the physical building, and there were just more steps involved in getting out some cash. But once ATMs became common, the idea of money being instantly available started to take hold. And this phrase pushes back against that idea.
Yeah, everyone knows what an ATM does. It gives you money on demand. So by asking that question, it immediately highlights the unrealistic expectation. It's a quick reality check.
Right. And this one sticks because it's a little more playful than the older phrases, I think. And it still delivers basically the same message, but it does it in a way that feels more conversational. It's not just shutting things down, it's also making a point. And that balance is probably why it caught on.
Yeah, one will sneak into your vocabulary. Not right away, but over time. And then you'll start to understand the situations where it fits. And once you use it once, it kind of opens the door to using it again and again. That's how it starts.
I guess. All right, so this next one feels very specific, and I've definitely heard this one. And this one I think shows up a little bit later. I'd say like teenage years, maybe into early adulthood. It's the phrase, "This isn't a hotel." And it was almost always said after someone came home late, left a mess, or just treated the house like it ran on its own. And it definitely had a tone to it because it wasn't just about one thing, it was about a pattern. It was like a buildup that was finally being addressed.
Yeah, this one always felt like it came after a series of smaller offenses. It wasn't usually said the first time you forgot to clean something up or came home late. It was said when it became a habit, and suddenly there was a bigger point being made, and as the person hearing it, you knew immediately this wasn't just about today.
And this phrase really reflects a shift in expectations as kids get older. When you're younger, the household just kind of runs around you and you don't think much about it. But as you get older, there's this expectation that you start contributing, being more aware, and respecting the space. So this phrase becomes a way of drawing that line.
And the comparison to a hotel is actually pretty perfect when you think about it. A hotel is a place where you come and go, someone else cleans up, and you don't have to think about the day-to-day maintenance. So saying this isn't a hotel is basically saying you're a part of this, not just passing through. It's a responsibility check.
Yeah, and that's really why this one tends to hit a little bit harder than some of the other ones. It's not just correcting behavior in the moment, it's pointing out a mindset. It's saying you need to be more aware of how your actions affect the people around you, and that's the bigger lesson with this one.
Yeah, and a lot of these phrases, it's one you don't fully appreciate until later. At the time, and it feels a little dramatic or unfair, but then when you get your own space or you're living with people and suddenly you understand what it meant, and that's when it really clicks.
And I think this is the last one I have on the list. And I think this is probably one of the most dramatic dad sayings of all time because it escalates so quickly.
I think everyone says this one at least
I
once.
think so too. And the phrase is, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? You go from asking to do something with you. I can't speak. You go from asking something your friends are doing and suddenly you're talking about jumping off a bridge. It feels kind of like a huge leap here. And if you're a kid, you're just trying to figure out how the conversation got there so fast.
Yeah, this always felt like the ultimate shutdown for peer pressure arguments. You say something like, well, everyone else is doing it, and immediately this comes back at you, and now you're stuck, because there's no real good response to that. You can't exactly defend the bridge scenario.
Yeah, it's true, and I have definitely used this one on my kids. And this phrase has actually been around for a really long time in different forms, all centered around the idea of questioning group behavior. It's meant to push you to think independently instead of just following what everyone else is doing. And using such an extreme example is very intentional. It's supposed to make you snap out of that mindset. It makes the point in a way that's really impossible to ignore.
And it works because it forces you to pause for a second. Even if you're annoyed, you still have to think about it. It kind of breaks the moment of the argument, and suddenly you're not just repeating what your friends are doing.
Momentum of the argument.
You're actually considering whether it makes sense.
Exactly. And I think that's why this one has stuck around for so long. It's not just about saying no, it's about encouraging a different way of thinking. It's trying to teach independence. And even if it comes across as a little over the top in the moment, honestly, it's the exaggeration part of it is what makes it so memorable for people.
And like a lot of these sayings, it's just one that circles back in life. You start to recognize the situations where people just go along with things without even really thinking about it. And you remember this phrase. Even if you don't say it out loud, it kind of stays in the background as a reminder.
And it's funny how all these sayings, even though they sound completely different on the surface, are basically all trying to say the same thing. They're trying to teach someone something quickly in a way that they'll remember. So whether it's about money, responsibility, or just thinking for yourself, the message is usually bigger than the phrase itself.
Yeah, they're all simple. They're all memorable. And they get repeated enough that they become part of how we think. Even if we don't realize at the time, they kind of grow with you.
Yeah. And then at some point, they shift from being something you hear to something you understand. And eventually something that you end up saying yourself. And that's the part that really brings it full circle. It's not just about the phrase anymore, it's the perspective.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the theme of this whole episode. These sayings aren't just about dads being repetitive or dramatic. They're about experience, responsibility, and trying to communicate with something quickly and effectively, even if it didn't always feel the way at the time.
Yeah, and with Father's Day coming up, this feels like the perfect time to appreciate these little things that maybe didn't make sense when we were younger. The phrases, the habits, the tiny lessons that were repeated so often they became part of who we are now. They might have been simple, but they definitely stuck with us.
And whether you find them funny now or slightly annoying or surprisingly accurate most of the time, they're part of a bigger picture. And they're part of how people pass things down, even in ways that they probably don't realize. And that's what kind of makes them more meaningful.
So maybe this year, instead of rolling your eyes at one of these classic dad sayings, you just let it land a little differently. Or if you've already caught yourself saying one, just accept it. It's too late. It happens to all of us eventually.
Yep. And then there's no escaping it. Once it starts, it's only a matter of time before you got a full collection, and that's how it works.
Yeah, and honestly, there are way worse things to inherit. And guys, that is going to do it for us today. If you're a dad celebrating Father's Day, happy Father's Day. And if you're a mom, Happy Father's Day to you too.
We'll see you later, alligator.
In a wild crocodile.